Are you an expert looking for ways to build your business? Do you have an important message that you know is going to impact the lives of others? Do you want to learn from some of the leading experts in a variety of industries on how to position your message, grow your business, and increase your revenues? Then you're in the right place with Power Up for Profits. Hey everybody, it's Kathleen Gage with Power Up for Profits, and today I'm thrilled to have an old friend. Okay, so he's a little old. I'm probably older than him, but no, a long-time friend, I should say. Trade show guy Tim Patterson. He comes with over 25 years experience in a radio career, and he moved into the trade show world in 2002. He started his own company, and I wasn't going to read this, but I'm going to because there's so much going on, and I didn't even have my reading glasses. So talk about old. Okay. But he started his company, TradeshowGuy Exhibits, in 2011, and Tim's been helping companies such as, I love this, Bob's Red Mill, Dave's Killer Bread, Schmidt's Naturals, and other with design and fabrication of trade show exhibits and logistical support. He's written 2 books in the past 5 years on trade show marketing. One is Trade Show Success, and the other is Trade Show Superheroes and Exhibiting Zombies. And they're both available at Amazon, and we'll have the links down below.
Indeed.
He's been blogging for over 11 years as the TradeshowGuyBlog.com, where you'll find his weekly vlog podcast, TradeshowGuy Monday Morning Coffee. So, Tim, great to have you here.
Thanks, Kathleen. It's nice to see you again. We have known each other for quite a while, haven't we? And, the old friend thing, I think you're right. It needs to be a longtime friend at this point, A
longtime friend. I know, because it's like I just qualified for Medicare, so it's like I have to be careful. Yeah, I know.
It's coming for me, too. But you know what? People work into their 80s and 90s now. Who cares, right?
Absolutely.
We're having fun.
It's so interesting because a lot of people are starting new careers in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And actually, it's interesting because I really see how what you do is so important to the knowledge base that people have when they're starting businesses if they're going to be at a trade show. How is that for a segue?
That's a great setup. In fact, if I can comment on that just for a minute, I was in radio for 25 years and I kind of stumbled into this industry, and I'll tell you how I got started. I got hired by a small company here in town. They said, "Oh, you got good people skills. We can teach you the rest." And they did teach me a lot about the kind of the nuts and bolts of estimating and stuff. But what I didn't know was about the trade show world itself. And so I started finding these consultants and experts and exhibitors and stuff, and I would interview them and record the interviews and put them on the company's website. This is before podcasting was even a thing. I would just record them, and I would, I actually at one point put together a CD of like 30 of these interviews and gave it out to people. So that helped my knowledge. It helped me learn because I got to talk to experts, and slowly I became, fairly knowledgeable about things that happened and things that worked and things that didn't work. And that's really how I started gathering the information. I just was curious about it,
and it's interesting because a lot of times we do kind of fall into a situation, and it's based on skills that we have and something that we may never have even thought about. And you are known as the trade show guy. You're definitely a bona fide expert. And it's interesting because for me, I only work with bona fide experts nowadays. It's like if I'm going to do one-on-one consulting and coaching with people, I want to make sure that they really have a solid foundation. So let's talk about the foundation of what it takes, one, to invest in being at a trade show. When is that wise and when is it not wise for a company to do that? What should they be doing with their booth? Let's talk about follow-up. So let's start with the foundational piece.
Well, I think the first thing you understand is that trade show marketing is expensive. It can be very expensive. You can get into it for, maybe not as much as you might expect, but you got to do your homework to figure out what it's going to cost. There's obviously the cost of getting to the show for you and your staff, whoever's going, the cost of the booth space itself, the cost of whatever you're going to put into it. And sometimes you can rent something, the fairly low budget to put there. Sometimes if you're committed to it, doing several shows over a few years, you're going to buy something, and sometimes buying something means buying something custom so that it really nails your brand. And companies that commit to it and get to that point got to spend a lot of time on it. I mean, the companies that do trade show marketing, about 1/3 of their budget of marketing budget is devoted to trade shows. And so I guess the first thing to understand is that it does take a lot of investment, and which means you got to be very careful to make sure you're doing the right thing. Make sure you're going to the right shows. Are your competitors there? That's a good question to ask. If you've got a lot of competitors there, it probably means it's a good show. If you're not sure, I always recommend going to the show a year and just walking the floor, talking to exhibitors, talking to attendees to find out if, in fact, that might be a good fit to be there or not, because you have to look at trade show marketing as kind of a long-term thing. A one-off is really not going to do the trick. But once you make that decision to commit to it, there's so much that you have to learn and figure out what to get in place, which is kind of why I wrote the books, Trade Show Success, 14 Steps to Proven Success in Trade Show Marketing. And there's a lot of steps to it. I mean, I put together a short list we can talk about if you want to get into that, kind of the must-dos, as far as trade show marketing.
Yeah, I would love to. And before I do, I want to ask a question about, you mentioned, sometimes it's better just to go to the show and other times to have the booth. When does somebody know that they've, in a way, graduated from just going to shows, which, for me, I see that there could be a lot of benefit to somebody doing that first, so they get a feel of the show, they get a feel of their competition you mentioned. So when does somebody really know that it's the right time to actually invest in a booth and then all the other expenses and investments you mentioned?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because most of the companies I've worked with over the last 4 or 5 years have been in a growth mode, and they've moved from small, like a banner stand here and a small rented table there, to custom booths. And so they're kind of crossing that Rubicon and making that commitment. They've decided, because they've gone to a couple of shows, they've rented the smallest space they could get. They've gotten good enough results from it. I had a client last year, their very first time at Natural Products Expo West, and they went in there. They got a 10-foot space, and they put up a little booth that we made out of reclaimed barnwood, which was kind of their look and feel, and they were serving tea of some sort, and they got such great response from it that they're going back with a booth. They're doubling their size again this year, and so they just took a chance, and they felt that their product was strong enough and they were going to get good enough response, and they picked the right show. I mean, going to the right show, I think, is very critical, because that the audience is going to be there if you're at the right show.
So do you like what you see? If you do, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and leave your comments down below. What did you most like about this video? By subscribing, you get updates of future videos that I put out. And by liking, what happens is it helps for this video and all other videos to go out over YouTube land. And so I really need you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and leave your comments below. Now, back to the video.
And so doing your research, most shows have a great website, and they have kind of a look at who the typical attendee is. 70 to 80 to 85% of the people that go to shows are decision makers. And so they're the ones that you want to come to your booth. And obviously you're going to have a lot of competition. And so that's when you start to talk to consultants and people that have been there before, and figuring out what the right move is to get that very first booth looking as best as you can based on the minimal budget that you've got. It's kind of you're walking a fine line, but if you can get in the door and make that commitment and do the right things at the show, and it pays off, then you can take the next step, which is where a lot of companies do.
Okay, so the right things at the show, that's great. What are the right things? Because a lot of people, they don't know what to do. I've gone to shows where I see people on their cell phones.
Yep.
They have a table in between them and the participants. And I've been in trade show management for years ago when I was with GTE Health Systems. I was the trade show manager, and so I've got a few decades of knowledge, but nothing like what you have. And it never ceases to amaze me the amount of money a company will at that point spend rather than invest, because they haven't trained their staff. So let's talk about the right things to do.
Well, I think the right thing, obviously, you hit the nail on the head, that the staff is the key to everything. You can have a great booth, but if your staff is disinterested and not trained, the booth won't really get you over the hump. You can have kind of a normal, not great booth, but if your staff is on top of it and you got something for people to do inside that booth, you're going to kill it. A booth staff training is probably one of the most important things you can do, because, as you mentioned, you see people on their cell phones. The last thing you want to see when you're walking up on a booth is someone eating a sandwich, right?
Unless
eating
they're willing
booth,
to share it,
Yeah, well, right. Now, obviously, a lot of shows that I go to are food shows, and you're going to be sampling food at the booths. But if the people that are working the actual booth are eating in the booth, it's a turnoff. It really is, and that's been the #1 turnoff. Looking at your cell phone, having your arms crossed, the body language. So body language is everything. And you don't want to be jumping on people when they come up, but you want to have a nice, casual, non-threatening question to ask people, an engaging question that has to do with what you're doing there. Not something like, hey, how's the show going for you? Because everyone asks that. Probably a question that has to do with your specific service or product that you're doing. Like if you're selling, let's just pull something out of the air. You're selling shipping services, and you can ask a question, do you handle the shipping in your company? And they say no. I say, but my friend Joe over here does. So anyway, some sort of question that gets them involved, gets them to answer, and you're looking to qualify them. And if you can qualify them, great, then you can have a little longer conversation. But you're also looking to disqualify them. If you have disqualified them, they're not going to be a customer. You politely disengage, because we all know trade shows are chaotic and you only have a limited amount of time there, and there's tens of thousands of people sometimes wandering through. And you want to make time for the right people. And so I think qualification and disqualification and knowing how to do that as a member of the booth staff is critical. Unfortunately, a lot of companies will send people that really shouldn't be there. Salespeople aren't necessarily the right people to be there. They're used to different situations away from a trade show floor. So it's a unique situation, and being prepared for it is probably the best thing you can do.
So what are some things that a company could do beforehand, not only to train their staff, but in preparation for the show? Would they reach out to participants? Would they, what are some of the tips and tricks that you recommend?
Well, for pre-show marketing, I think there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, you start with social media. We could spend an hour on that. I think that telling people you're going to be there and showing some teasers of what you're going to be, what booth you're going to be, that's all very key. Making sure, I mean, there's 4 or 5 ways to reach out to potential attendees. And if you can get a list, great. Obviously, if they're clients of yours or customers or people that you know, you can email them, you can call them, you can send them something in the mail. If you really want that key person to get there, the old trick is to send them one glove and keep the other one and say, come get the other glove. I mean, that's just been done in the past, but you can find something of that. If you come to our booth and meet us at, whatever time we set up a time, then we've got a really nice premium gift for you. And then you're buying a half an hour of their time or whatever they can spare. So I think a lot of it is targeting, pre-show marketing, figuring out who you want to come to the booth, making as many appointments as you can. Again, this kind of depends on the industry and your market, and what you're trying to sell. Is it business to business? Is it business to consumer? There's a lot of variables in there, but as much as you can line up beforehand, that's great. And of course, the whole public relations and public, the marketing aspect of it as well, which is, making sure you're getting press releases out to the right industries, the right publications, the blogs, so that people do know what's going on there. And I think once you're there, capture as much information as you can, photos, videos, so that you can roll that out as time goes by over the next several months to let people know what you did there that weren't able to make it.
Okay, and what about a private gathering for your VIP clients, for your higher level clients? I know that some companies will rent a room and they'll have a private affair. How effective are those in your estimation?
I've been to a few of them and I've seen that done. I think it can be effective. I think probably that is as effective as long as you have a booth there. I've seen people go in there and try and kind of guerrilla market it, and they're not really exhibiting because they couldn't afford it, but they can get a suite and get some people there. I've seen it succeed. I've seen it not succeed. I think if you have a presence there already, that's a nice way to kind of spiff the people that you want to spend more time with. Having a client dinner, nothing wrong with that. That's great as well. So having those types of things that are around your presence there, usually if it's a national show, you're only going to one national show a year, maybe 2. And so you can kind of focus on that, and the people that are going to be there, the people you want to meet with, and so you can put a lot of energy and time into that. It does take a lot of planning, and so you've got to spend several months ahead of time to make sure all that lines up.
And at the actual show, I know that some people want the corner spot, or they have a preference for where they want to be seen. In your experience, where would you say is the best spot on the trade show floor?
Near the front door probably, or depending on how big the hall is, maybe about halfway back towards the back. You hate to kind of be along the back sides, along the aisles. Although if you run the right promotion and run the right social media campaign, you can draw people back there. I've seen that done successfully as well. But I think just basic rule of thumb is get close to the front door or in the middle of the hall as you can, as best you can. And certainly there are some shows that have a point system, how long you've been there, how big of a booth you've had over the years. And so they're going to have kind of seniority, I guess, to get to those spaces, and you've got to spend your time and earn your way up to those particular spaces.
And remind us again how people can get in touch with you before I go with my next question.
The best place, probably, I've built a sort of hub site for all the stuff we do, TradeshowGuy.net. It's got links to all my books. It's got links to our company website, to my blog. I also put my podcast and video blog there as well. So TradeshowGuy.net is the main site that you can find everything I do.
Okay, I want to make sure that people that are just listening to this and they're not looking at it, that they get that URL. Now, you talked about successful social media campaigns, driving traffic to the booth. Give me an example of one of the most successful campaigns that either you've been involved with or you've seen done. You
know, the one that pops into my mind is there was this company in, I think, Kentucky. This is several years ago. They're going to one of the big shows like CES in Vegas. And so what they started to do, they built this like camper van, like they modified like an old Volkswagen camper van. And they started, a few days before they took off, they started tweeting about it and putting pictures on social media. And everywhere they went, they would post, "We're coming, we're coming, we're coming." And they took about 4 or 5 days to get across the country. And by the time they'd gotten there, because they kept posting pictures of this kind of goofy looking van, they had 1,000 people waiting for them as they drove that van onto the floor of the show. And so that was a very successful and very memorable. They pulled it off really well. And it was probably 8 or 9 years ago, but that concept certainly could work something like that. And they did a good job at it. And tell me about the most successful booth that you've designed, or what you think is one of the most creative. I know they're all creative, but what's one that really stands out in your mind? Because that's what your company offers, is booth design and development. Well, I will go back to Bob's Red Mill. We've worked with them as long as I've had my company, and they were actually a client of mine from the other company that then closed when the owner retired in 2011, which is why I started my company. Bob's Red Mill is a company out of the Portland area that's been around since probably the late 80s, early 90s, and they started doing trade show marketing in the late 90s. We hooked up with them in probably 2005 or so and built a 20 by 20 booth for them, and they needed a new one here in 2012, so we hired a designer, and they have a store. Bob's Red Mill has a store which looks like a mill. It's up in Milwaukee, right on 224. You can't miss it. Big red building. You drive by. Their booth echoes that in so many ways. The designer nailed it. It's really the most iconic booth that I've ever been involved in. You can walk up to that, and if you're familiar with the brand, you'll see it on the brand. You see Bob's face there. Bob Moore is like turning 92 this year. He still goes to all the shows. And that booth looks like the brand, like no other booth I've ever seen, I think. That's incredible. And he's probably still going because it's healthy stuff that they create. So, and I will one comment that Bob has made that I've used over the years, and I've seen him make this several times in interviews and stuff, is that trade show marketing has helped us open up markets that we would otherwise never have been able to get to. Oh, I love that. That's a great quote, actually. It's a great one, yes. Now, you do the Natural Products Show? Yes. Tell me about that. Natural Products Show is in Anaheim. It's been going for about 40 years. It's the Anaheim Convention Center. It has grown a lot over the last, I've been going 15 or 16 years since I first got into this industry. The first booth I ever sold was to Kettle Foods here in Salem. And we did a nice custom 20 by 20, and I started going to that show, I'm going to say 2003. And so I hate to count, maybe it is 17 or 18 years by now. But it's this year it'll probably attract about 80,000 attendees, 3,500 exhibitors over 4 days. It takes over the Anaheim Convention Center as well as 2 floors on the Marriott. It's just huge. It's humongous. It's all about natural products, as you might imagine. Food, and Schmidt's Naturals is also a client of ours. They've been going there for years, and they've seen their business grow so much. In fact, they sold it to a multinational company a couple of years ago. Interesting. Yeah, so it's a great show, big show, and it's fun. It's crazy. I dread it, but I look forward to it like crazy.
Right,
it's just like 3 or 4 days of
That's great. So,
Yeah.
and natural products, and definitely within the food industry, are growing. You know, I've been plant-based now for 16 months, and I'm actually getting certified in plant-based nutrition, and I'm just shocked at how big that industry is getting.
Humongous.
So,
Yeah,
oh my gosh, it's crazy in a good way. Now let's talk about the follow-up, because again, okay, they've invested in a booth. They have a beautiful booth. They've done everything right at the booth. They've got a stack of contacts and leads. Is there something that people can do while at the trade show to really differentiate between the, if you will, the A, B, and C's, the ones that, oh, these are hot leads, we need to get in touch with them right away? And then what's the follow-up? Because I think that's where a lot of people fall down. They go back to their office, business as usual, they get caught up, and those cards are just sitting there.
I think let's start off with what probably is typical, in that the statistic I heard when I first got into this industry that I couldn't believe is that 80% of all leads are not followed up. And I said, really? Why would you go to a show and let 8 out of 10 not get followed up on? It's still true. People don't follow up on leads, and there's a lot of reasons for it. Probably the typical lead is someone writes down a couple of pieces of information, maybe gets a business card and says he's interested. Follow up. And then that information gets back to the sales team, and they look at it and they make 4 or 5 calls off the information. They go, these guys aren't really interested in here. So they discount the rest of them. So I think the challenge is make sure you have good information. As they say, good information in, good information out. And so as you're talking to someone and you've identified that they are looking to buy what you're selling, they have a budget, they know when they're going to buy, and they are in a position of making a decision, then they're qualified. Once they're qualified, you figure out what that follow-up is. For instance, get the right name and contact. Figure out when is the follow-up going to be. Make a date. Put it in the calendar. If it's something that's 3 or 4 months off, like I got to send you something, I'm not quite ready, okay, then that's maybe not as critical. But if it's in the next week or 2 weeks, you know, make an arrangement at that point. Where is the follow-up? Is it going to be in person? Can it be in person? Or is it on the phone? Is it on a Skype meeting? Is it on a Zoom meeting? Who is doing the follow-up? Is it you who are talking to them, or is it going to be handed off? And what exactly is that follow-up going to be? Is it going to be, I'm going to send you a sample, I'm going to send you a brochure, I'm going to meet and bring something over, I'm going to give you a demo, we're going to actually order something, we're going to, you know, whatever that follow-up is, so that once you have all that information, then that follow-up becomes much easier. And if it gets handed off to a sales crew or a couple of other salespeople, then they know that information is valid and they can follow up based on the information you've got. I think that really is the key to making your follow-up work.
Excellent, excellent. And this is Kathleen Gage. We're talking with Tim Patterson, the trade show guy. And Tim, what about widgets at the show? You know, or tchotchkes, I should say. You know, people go and they get these bags and they fill up the bags. And I know oftentimes those bags are dispersed to the kids, to you know, whoever. So what are some effective things that people can distribute at the show, if at all?
Well, you know, yeah, you ask a good question. That's a very highly specialized part of trade show marketing, and I personally don't get involved with it, but I do know several people, and it kind of changes from year to year. Tech stuff is very popular these days. Little chargers, you know, that can charge a cell phone. You know, adapters for putting your USB port in a car, for something, for instance, like that. There's a lot of those that are out there. You know, I see a lot of notebooks like this. You know, I still pick up things that are, you know, printed and emblazoned, and something you can use. Something I actually use every single day is a letter opener, and I can't find it, but oh, here it is. I picked this up at a trade show, and so something as simple as that. I would talk to someone who knows that industry and knows what's very hot, what's very popular. And then sometimes if you have a very specific promotion, they can come up with something that works really well for that particular promotion. But there are people out there that do that for a living. Right. I don't, but there's certainly a lot of stuff out there, and there's, you know, more and more. I looked at catalogs and go, oh my God, there's so much out here. It's just crazy. But I think it is important, if you have some good swag, as they call it, to give away. I do agree that at some shows, a lot of people will just walk around with their bag and get as much as they can and be done with it, and then go home and they just give it away or throw it away because they're not going to use it. But I think the right piece, premium gift that you give away is a good thing to look at.
Well, years ago, I actually co-authored a book called 101 Ways to Get Your Foot in the Door. And I co-authored
That's right. I
with
remember that book.
Yes, two women that they owned a very, very successful promotional products company. And, just ideas of like the glove, send one glove and tell them to come pick up the other glove, and, just fun little things. So, and really what you have pointed out is that there's different aspects of participating in a trade show, and each person has an expertise. Now, you've mentioned competition a few times, and I know that depending on the industry and who you're talking to, some people say, I have no competition, but we all do. How do you, what's your take on companies collaborating at a show, perhaps two competitors, and they join together and they put their budgets together? Have you ever seen that work effectively?
I have seen it work. I'm not sure how effective it has been, but I have seen companies, 2 or 3 or 4 companies get together, and to where they've, for instance, the one that pops into my mind is they've got some sort of little map of where they are in the booth, and if you go around and get it stamped at all 4 or 5 or 6 of these kind of competing, but they're more complementary businesses, then you're driving traffic around to each one. And if you bring back the map that's stamped with everyone, you can, get a bigger prize or something like that. That encourages people to go back and forth from booth to booth. And I have seen some booths, some larger booths with a couple of smaller exhibitors inside, like a large island booth with a couple of guys in the back that you start to talk to, you realize that they're not actually part of this big group, but they're support to them in a way. And so there are different ways to do it, and there's nothing wrong with exploring that, having that conversation. I think one of the things when you do go to a trade show is to kind of look for those opportunities. If you're a small exhibitor, you got a 10 by 10, but you see some people down there that you think, man, I'd be a good fit for their customers, but I'm not really competing with them. Have that conversation. Nothing wrong with that.
We actually did that when I was at GTE. We collaborated with our top clients, and I think it was this was about 25 years ago. For $5,000, they could participate in the booth and have a terminal. We were a info products, healthcare systems, and our software was over $1 million, and they all had different types of software. And so we collaborated, which allowed us not only to expand the size of the booth, but to drive more traffic, which that's another concern a lot of people have, is how do I drive traffic around the showroom floor? For the perhaps the conference developer, they want to get people onto the trade show floor, especially if there are breakout sessions going on and keynote presentations. They want to make sure that their exhibitors are getting the traffic. So what are some creative ways that you've seen conference coordinators encourage people to go to the trade show floor?
Well, you see everyone these days. I mean, I've never seen anyone not at a show not doing this, looking at their phone. So they're on their social media, and a lot of them are on, they're searching for or putting up the hashtag of the show. So obviously the show producers or the organizers need to make sure that they're encouraging all of their exhibitors to use social media. I think that's probably the number one thing. And the second thing is have something going on in your booth that kind of piques interest. Having an activity in your booth, and there's so many different things you can do with an activity. There are a company I had on a podcast here in the last couple of months that does nothing but create games that people can play inside a booth that brings traffic in, because as you know, a small crowd creates a bigger crowd very quickly. The other thing is that in some cases, and maybe a lot of cases, a professional presenter is the key. I've seen so many of them do this really well. 3 times an hour, they're going to do an 8-minute presentation that's part entertainment and part information. And this works really well in tech, but I think it works in pretty much any industry. And so there's a lot of things that go into doing that. Obviously, you need to have a good entertainer, a good information presenter, a good presenter. But then you've got to have a crew that's ready for that. Because if you've got 30 or 40 people that are watching this, you don't want to let them all get away. You've got to be able to have people that are going to have a quick question and answer with them, or capture a card or scan them or something before they get out. So there's a lot of different things you can do to draw people to your booth and to circulate people around the trade show floor. And I think that working with the organizers and doing those other things on your own, some sort of activity, and then knowing what to do with that crowd once they get there.
Excellent. And I'm talking with Tim Patterson, the Trade Show Guy. And Tim, before we call it a day here, what would be one piece of advice you could give people to really optimize their involvement with trade shows?
I think probably the number one thing is know what your goal is. You can go to a trade show and say, I want to increase sales. Well, everyone wants to increase sales, but there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think some of the different things you can achieve as goals at your trade show is brand awareness. Especially the bigger shows. If people recognize who your brand is, that's good. Sales are very important, although sometimes you need to ramp up your distribution, and that's what your focus is. Maybe you're trying to generate leads. You're trying to reach new markets like Bob's Red Mill does by going to bigger shows and you're talking to different people. Maybe your goal is to launch a brand new product or brand new service, and if you're focused on that, maybe you're there to find new hires. You never know. Maybe they're to meet current customers and partners and distributors. There's a lot of different reasons to go to a show, but if your booth staff knows why you're there and you know exactly why you're there, that really focuses everything to those 2 or 3 goals before you actually open up the booth.
Excellent. Well, Tim, it's been delightful. And again, I'm talking with Tim Patterson, the Trade Show Guy. And Tim, go ahead and give us your web address again.
Kathleen, I appreciate being on your show. The address is TradeshowGuy.net. You can find everything from there, and that's probably the best place to find the books and the blog and the podcast and the company site and all that stuff. So
excellent.
TradeshowGuy.net.
If you need a trade show booth developed, contact Tim, and I'm sure that he'd have a conversation with you. Am I right? Even if you're not sure that you're going to make the decision yet, but have a conversation with Tim and get the information before you make the investment. This is Kathleen Gage with Power Up for Profits. Thank you for listening, and you have a great day.